Hello? Can people hear me yet?
Yep.
They can? Hi! Hello, everyone! I can't see what's going on because I'm on a delay with all of you. Welcome to the 25th Port Havenites StreamCast, which is pretty exciting. And what's even more exciting is we're here with a guest. I don't know which Brady box he's in, to my left or my right, but we're here with Adam Christopher, who is a really cool author, by the way.
Oh. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning.
Whatever time you're in.
Whatever time it is, yeah.
Yeah, well, we usually have to deal with time zones, but not quite this many time zones. So it's extra layer of fun.
This is one of his books I finished reading recently, Made to Kill. Also know him from writing one of the many short stories in From a Certain Point of View, which we already got the chance to interview you about. And the interview about that story is in the description here if you guys are interested in reading that after the stream. As well as a 1-minute video I did about End of Watch. So, which we were just talking about how I work at a TV station. I enjoyed the story because I know what it's like to be at an end of a watch. But anyway.
I can imagine. Oh my god.
And I was saying before we started that what I wanted this stream to be was just spoiler chat for an hour, but Jess has told me I can't do that.
No, so. I do plan on reading the other Ray Electromatic books. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Yeah, I got very quickly obsessed.
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, the last one only came out 2 months ago. So,
yeah, real recent.
So it's fine. You've got time to catch up.
How did the character of Ray come about? This I guess for those of you who don't know, he's a robot from the 1960s. The last robot in the 1960s, right? Is it 60s?
Yeah, 65. Yeah.
And he's a detective / assassin in LA / Hollywood.
Yes. Yeah, it started. I did a space opera series for my publisher Tor Books, and as a new author, one of the things that you had to do was this sort of questionnaire, and one of the questions was something like, if you could read any book by an author, living or dead, some unknown manuscript that had just been discovered, what would it be? So I said, clearly it has to be Raymond Chandler's long-lost science fiction series,
right?
Because he's one of my favorite authors, and he absolutely hated science fiction, like completely hated it. He wrote to his agent in 1958 or something, like complaining about science fiction, saying, I can't believe that people get paid money for this. And he kind of wrote this. He wrote this little section. It's like 2 paragraphs, and it's just complete nonsense. But like, it's still Raymond Chandler nonsense because it still has his, his voice and his style.
Right.
And clearly, he was actually writing a science fiction novel in secret, and he was hoping that his agent was gonna, say, "Wow, this is amazing. You should really write it." So my editor saw the interview, which went up on Tor.com because Tor Books was the publisher,
right?
And he said, you should completely write this lost Raymond Chandler science fiction story. And I was like, okay, fine. So I wrote a short story. It was more like a novella called Brisk Money,
right?
Which is kind of like the origins of Ray Electromatic, his main character. So he's a private investigator, and as you said, he's the last robot. And there's a kind of flaw in his programming in that his controller is this computer called Ada, which is like it's a supercomputer. It's the 1960s. It's the size of an office.
Right.
But she's programmed to make a profit because, like, he was the last experimental robot. They shut the whole program down because people, it turns out, had robophobia, this like deep psychological distrust and fear of robots,
Right.
which no one predicted was going to exist. But it did. So they shut the robots down except for Ray because his program was like the last one was experimental. But anyway, to cut a long story short, Ada is programmed to make a profit. So there's more money in killing people than there is in investigating mysteries.
It's fair.
Yeah, and then that's it. And I was writing the short story, and I kind of put notes all the way through because there's little hints of things. I said, "Oh yeah, I could write a book about this, or I can write a book about this." And he kind of, my editor again, bless him, said, "Yeah, okay, go for it. Pitch me 3 novels, and we'll see what we can do." And that's what it turned into.
Right, that was one thing.
So I was going to say Brisk Money is the first one that's on Tor.com, and then it goes to Made to Kill, which is the book that you've got there. And then there's actually 10 into 5 things.
Right.
So there's Brisk Money, Made to Kill. Killing Is My Business is the second novel, and then there's Standard Hollywood Depravity, which is the novella. And then I Only Killed Him Once is the last book.
Right.
Which is a great title, by the way.
Yeah, well, it's funny because the titles all come from Raymond Chandler. So there's like Brisk Money is what he said about his science fiction. He said, "I can't believe people get paid brisk money for this." Insert curse word there. And then Standard Hollywood Depravity is from a letter that he wrote, or a piece that he wrote for some magazine, and he was complaining about Hollywood because he worked as a screenwriter,
right,
and was paid vast fortunes and had a pretty good life,
right,
and he's just complaining in this piece about Hollywood now. It's just all nonsense, and he hates it. And then I Only Killed Him Once was from he had like a list of titles that he was going to use for stuff,
right,
and it's kind of like a little sort of edit of one of those. But they were fun to write, and they're kind of shortish, fun 1960s, sort of a pastiche of the hard-boiled kind of noir style.
Right.
They're not funny, but they're fun. They're not comedy, but they're kind of entertaining was the idea.
Right.
And yeah.
I was going to ask you, so you've done a couple of series now, including that one. When you start a series, one of the things I loved about the Ray books was when I got to the end of them, I wanted to go back to the beginning and do them again, because there are all those things that you recognize at the end that happened along the way. How do you plan that out in advance, or to what extent do you plan that out in advance?
It's funny because those books were actually very difficult to write and to plan, because one thing I should probably say is that Ray has a 24-hour memory limit.
Right.
In that, which is great for an assassin because there's no evidence that can pin him to anything. But it's difficult to write because also for a series, not only do you have to carry the story across a book, you have to kind of do the story arc over 3 books.
Right.
At the same time, remind readers of what kind of went on before, which is tricky when the main character doesn't remember what's gone on before. So the planning was actually pretty loose. And the writing was pretty loose because I knew then when I got to the end, I had to go back with each of the three main novels and, give them a really good edit and tidy up and rewrite to make sure that I had everything in place. Which is actually kind of mostly how I do writing these days anyway. There's kind of a difference between writing what they call original fiction, which is like your own books,
right?
Like Made to Kill, or tie-in and licensed fiction, which is like I've done books for Elementary and a video game called Dishonored.
We have Midway 1942 in the chat has brought that up already. He's saying he loves your video game tie-ins.
Thank you very much. But the difference with those is that they really have to be outlined to the hilt. Because a lot of people have to approve it and read it and make sure that it fits in, which is great in one way. But then with your own books, it's kind of this freedom of freewheeling a little bit, which is actually what I did with the robot books. And it's like, I'm really glad that it all worked out, and that you actually managed to go back and kind of spot things.
Right.
So it's funny because also the original pitch was really unusual, because normally when you're doing, there's two ways you can get published. You can either like write a book, finish it, everything, and the editor likes it, buys it, or you can, get a book bought based on a proposal.
Right.
And as you progress through a career in writing, you kind of start out having to write the whole book, because obviously, editors and agents need to know that you can actually do it.
Right.
Because a book is actually quite hard work to do. But then as you keep going on, it's like, well, they know your track record, and they know that you can do it. So you can kind of start selling stuff just on, sample chapters and outlines. For the Ray books, there's 3 of them, the main novels, because there's the 3 novels, and then there's a novella and the short story. Like I said, okay, fine, I'll do a proposal. And the editor was like, no, I just want to be surprised by the books. I want to be like, if I walked into a bookstore and like picked it up and read it and not know what's going on.
Right.
Which is like, firstly, okay, fine, great. But secondly, it's like, how can I sell a book? How can you buy a book from me that like you don't know what's going on? So literally what I wrote was like fake dust jacket text.
Right.
On the inside of the books.
Mm-hmm.
I just wrote 3 of those. Kind of, I mean, obviously I knew what was going to happen, but there was a lot of kind of, this sounds kind of cool. It's like, yeah, that'll work. And it's funny because the 3 books, they actually ended up pretty much how I thought. Maybe the 3rd book kind of digressed a little bit, because what had happened during, books 1 and 2 was the story of Ray and his kind of quest for his identity and his history.
Right.
Kind of was much stronger than I had planned. So the 3rd book kind of really ties it all up. Hopefully, anyway.
Yeah. I mean, and that was one of the things I really liked personally about those books was, because when you watch something or you read something, there are always moments where you know more than some of the characters do. And it was almost always that way with Ray.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting watching him learn things that we were already taking for granted.
Yeah. And this is why they were difficult to write. Like, they were fun to write, but they were difficult to write because this is the thing where you have, when you're writing a series, there's 2 things you have to do. You have to continue the story, and you have to remind readers of what happened before.
Right.
You do that anyway with normal characters and people and things who can actually remember yesterday.
Right.
So when your main character can't remember what happened, the first drafts of all the books were kind of twice as long, because I was like, well, okay, I need to remind the main character what happened and the reader. And a lot of the first pass of editing with my agent and editor was like, cut this out. You've gone over this like 5 times. Cut this out. But like in the middle of writing it, you have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's that thing of, you obviously know what's going to happen, hopefully. So they were a challenge to write. They were fun. And like, I'm kind of sad that they're finished. But I'm relieved in a way as well, because like some of it was a bit of a headache.
Well, it's funny, some of those moments, I've just read Brisk Money and Made to Kill Myself, but some of my favorite moments in reading it were the moments where it was like Ray knew he didn't know something, and I knew what he didn't know, and that was always...
Yeah.
And you would have like, there would just be kind of like a kind of a dry quip, and it was like an ironic quip that I'd always enjoy. Like, he liked this guy and he wasn't sure why, or he didn't like this guy, he wasn't sure why.
Then you can imagine like afterwards, draw a map of all characters and all the events and go through, and it's like, does Ray know about this?
Right.
What does he know about this? It's like, does he remember that or not?
Right.
But yeah, they were fun. I like them.
I think what really got me into reading the first one was this concept that like in the 20s there was this whole labor force of robots, and then we got rid of them, and then now and it was just like, it was obviously set on Earth, like in a space that really existed, but I like kind of alternate history stuff like that, and so it was just neat to have this kind of you built your own world within a world, I guess. And how is that a thing you enjoy doing, or is that just like, what is your process when you sit down and you're like, okay, I got to create the space that a story exists in? Because that's a part that's always fascinated me about storytelling.
Yeah, it's funny because with the Made to Kill books, I love the way that they're actually kind of they're kind of retro futuristic, but it's a future that's gone. Like by the time the books happen, robots are gone. Like,
right.
It's actually kind of it's retro futuristic history. I just made that up. And I wrote my first two novels. Well, actually, my first novel called Empire State is actually almost like in a way, looking back, it's like a dry run almost for the robot books, because it's that kind of retro future. That Empire State is set in a sort of Prohibition era New York, although it's not really New York. It's like an alternate sort of dimension. I think, and this is kind of interesting because one thing as a writer, I mean, I only remember this recently because I just redone my website. Like, I've had 19 books published, or 19 projects, which is crazy. And I can't remember half of what I did with them and when I wrote them and how I wrote them. But like, you learn how you write and what you're capable of. And in terms of being like a pro writer, that's important for things like deadlines and scheduling, because you know what you can do and you know how much work it takes. So like these days, planning and setting and things, I just kind of, if I have an idea, I will sort of write it and not worry about it. If you know what I mean.
Right.
If I have, I never really start writing a book until I've had the idea in my head for like a year or so. And I make notes and maybe titles and names and settings and things, but I think most of the work is kind of done in that, just like looking out the window, watching TV, doing the dishes. It's like you just kind of think of stuff, and it all kind of just piles up and forms itself into sort of a coherent idea.
Right.
But I mean, ideas, there's a difference between an idea and a story, and like a lot of people can have great ideas, but they can confuse that with a story. Because I remember I've met people at conventions, and they've said, I've got these great ideas for stories, and I write like, and then it just kind of dies.
Right.
I don't know what to write next. And it's like, it's because you don't have a story. You've got an idea, which is when the whole thing of like, well, where do you get your ideas from? That people actually do ask writers.
Right.
And it's like, it's the wrong question, because it doesn't matter. Ideas, there's millions of ideas, but it's the story that is the kind of how it comes together. So planning and setting, it's just kind of whatever comes to mind. I don't really set out to write a particular kind of book, because some writers write epic fantasy or space opera or whatever, and they're fans of those genres. Which is great, but I'm more kind of, I don't know, looser a little bit.
Right. I was actually going to ask you about that, because I know that, at least the way like probably your works would be classified, they are a variety of genres. Like the one I'm reading actually right now, Hangwire, is very different than the other stuff. So like, how do you, as a writer, and maybe it just comes down to the idea and the story again, but like, do you think about that when you're writing it? That, because you have superhero novels also, so like, how do you handle that like difference of genre also?
Yeah, I think when I started out, I deliberately, I wanted to write superhero fiction. So like Empire State and Seven Wonders, which is the second book, and The Age of Atomic, which is the third book, and that's the sequel to Empire State. They're kind of very superhero influenced. I mean, Seven Wonders is a complete like Silver Age comic book crossover event thing in prose form. And yeah, and then like you said, you're reading Hang Wire, and Hang Wire was the fourth book, and it's like completely different kind of urban fantasy with gods and monsters and possessed circus trapeze artists.
Yeah, it felt a lot to me like that Neil Gaiman book, American Gods. Like that's what I had in my mind the whole time.
But that's the thing, is like I just had an idea. It's like I'm trying to even remember the book. It's like I had an idea for this kind of malevolent force that lives in the earth, and then a malevolent force that comes down from space. And the kind of two meet, and in the middle is the circus, which doesn't sound the most obvious kind of story choice, but you know, that's the thing. I didn't really worry about it. I was like, I have a story here, I have an idea, and I have the story to go with it, and I have the characters to tell the story. So that's what I wanted to do. The space opera series that I mentioned that I did for Tor, The Burning Dark and The Machine Awakes, that was a deliberate thing of I'm going to write a space opera. Like it's going to have, you know, but again, it was kind of different because The Burning Dark is actually a kind of traditional haunted house ghost story with clanking chains and cold spots and dark shadows and things, but it's set on a space station. But, you know, I didn't worry about the fact that I was kind of blending horror and science fiction, or kind of fantasy and science fiction. I just kind of write what comes, which is fun because it means I'm not really beholden to a particular genre or subgenre, which is quite good, I think. But it kind of suits the way I write, you know. And I read across multiple genres as well. I'm a fan of crime and thriller and mystery, and as well as science fiction, you know, and horror. So kind of that comes out in the writing as well, I think.
How does that apply? So you talk about going from different genres. How does that apply when you sit down to write something that's an intellectual property? So when you sit down to write a Dishonored game, is it, you know, obviously at some point you're adapting a thing that already exists, but is it something where you're able to think of different elements to bring in, or is it usually a little bit more laid out for you ahead of time?
I've been lucky with the tie-ins that I've done. So the two for Elementary, which is a TV series, which is the Johnny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu set in New York City, sort of Sherlock Holmes thing. And Dishonored, which is like a kind of steampunk assassin, sort of pseudo-Victorian fantasy world about this empire and this assassin. And I've been lucky in that they kind of just let me get on with it. You know, Elementary was easy in a way because they needed stories that were essentially TV episodes that you could slot in, like, you know, at the time it was like season 1, season 2. You could just kind of pick a slot where there's a gap and put the story in. And for that, you know, they knew, and this is a go back to the genre thing, knew that I liked crime, thriller, and mystery, kind of suspense fiction, and I was a fan of Elementary, and Sherlock Holmes, so that kind of all came together. And so long as I operated with boundaries of, you know, the TV show, that was fine. Dishonored was interesting because there's 3 games. Dishonored 1, Dishonored 2, and then Death of the Outsider. And they needed 3 novels that kind of bridge the gap between Dishonored 1, Dishonored 2, Death of the Outsider, and then the 3rd book, which comes out in September. It's actually like 2 weeks. Is post the 3rd game. Okay. So there was a story need, which I kind of had to fulfill for each of those. So that was more kind of structured. But again, it's like I was a fan of the games. I had played the games. And which is good because like the very first fiction was Doctor Who fan fiction when I was seriously when I was 6 years old, and I've got the books from school where I like they survive. And it's funny because they're like basically just rip-offs of what I was watching on TV. So I grew up in New Zealand, and New Zealand television at the time in the 80s was kind of 10 years behind everywhere else. So we got John Pertwee, 70s era Doctor Who. But I've always been like a fan fiction writer, Doctor Who stuff, and kind of other things. So to be able to kind of take that approach to things like Elementary, which I was a big fan of, and Dishonored, which I was a big fan of, kind of helps because immediately I know the world and I can kind of Elementary. I remember the first novel, very short notice, for various reasons. So they needed someone who could come in who knew the show and characters. And Dishonored being a video game is kind of a different thing because like with Elementary there was at the time there was like 50 episodes. Now it's over 100. So, but what I do each morning when I read books was like, okay, I'd watch an episode of Elementary, and then I'd do my work, and the next day I'd watch an element, just to kind of keep it fresh, keep the characters fresh in the setting. Dishonored being a video game, it's like, well, obviously it's actors and voiceovers and cutscenes and all that storytelling that's in the game. But then you as the player play the story and play the characters for kind of most of it. So it's kind of, in a way, it's more difficult because it was much looser with the characters and the setting. But then there's another kind of challenge of that kind of time, Elementary. So Johnny Lee Miller was Sherlock Holmes and Lucy Liu was Watson. So, and it's watched by like millions of people. So I had, when you're doing a book, like I had to nail not just the story and the setting, but the performances of those actors playing those characters. Because when someone who loves Elementary picks up the book, they want to, like page one, they want to recognize characters. And like imagine this is what is going to happen on TV next week. Which is kind of like I had practice doing because of Doctor Who fan fiction. Which I'd written for 20 years. So that gave a really good kind of grounding for that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you kind of along those lines too. I know, I mean, I've never worked on a TV show before, but I know that like they talk about like having even like a show Bible that's like a continuity document. Like, was that something that you got, or did they take care of checking those details when you write for other properties?
Generally, in my own experience, to Elementary, there was a show Bible which was massive. This encyclopedia, literally an encyclopedia of every character and every just everything, which is great because like not many people get to see that kind of. And then, but then again, because there was the body of episodes, there's like this whole, at the time it was like 2.5 seasons of episodes, which is like the ultimate resource because that is the thing. Dishonored was really cool because I got to go out to the game developer studio in France, I think 3 or 4 times, and go over the story, develop the story with the game's director, Harvey Smith, and the people at Arcane Studios, and because they were in the middle of making the games while I was like writing the book. So I got a kind of unique kind of behind the scenes look at what they were doing, and I got to play the games kind of in development phase, which is great.
That's cool.
And like being a fan of those franchises, amazing. I get to see all this Elementary secret stuff and I see all this Dishonored secret stuff. So like that's my main experience obviously with tie-ins, and I think that tends to be how it is. They will the license holder will help you as much as possible, because it's in their interest as well. They want a good product that fits, and going back to the thing of being a fan, I think like you don't have to be a fan to be a tie-in writer, because that's actually an unreasonable expectation. Like, for example, I was thinking about this the other day. If you think about something like, Riverdale, which is the Archie.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like, so imagine you're a TV writer, and you're hired to the writing room of Riverdale.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to expect you to be an Archie Comics fan.
Right.
They are going to expect you to be a professional TV writer.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of it in that way, it's like, yeah, you're a writer, and they know that you can do the job. And if you're a fan, it gives you shortcuts. So like with Elementary, because it was such short book, like I could go straight in, and it was very useful, but like not essential. So even though I kind of draw this connection between tie-in fiction, that's not necessarily, a requirement. I'm lucky in that the stuff that I've done, I've been a fan of, and I've kind of looked at it like fan fiction, because like fan fiction is amazing, and to be able to do it in a context that is actually, canonical, and to contribute to that world in a way that is actually meaningful and kind of has impact, is amazing. It's like really like amazing.
Yeah.
There's a Dishonored wiki and there's a Elementary wiki, and the books and the storylines are like kind of part of the fabric of those properties.
Right.
Which is cool, because I'm like a super geek about stuff like that. And, I've loved science fiction and fantasy and TV and film like my whole life. So I'm very lucky and very grateful for the opportunity to be able to do it.
Right. Have you ever, or what would you think, rather, of someone wanting to come along and write a story in one of the worlds that you've created? You're talking about the value of fan fiction. How would you feel as a creator if you were to get some of your own?
That would be really good, and it's the thing, 'cause like that's the ultimate engagement with an audience is for them to start creating stuff. And it's interesting because my first novel, Empire State, the publisher actually created a kind of Creative Commons licensed shared world project.
Oh, really?
Around the book, and it was experimental because like publishers don't normally do that kind of. So they were just kind of trying to see what happened. So what they did, they commissioned like a whole bunch of kind of professional stuff. So there was a comic, there was short stories, there was artwork, and there's a photography exhibition thing. And then people could, having read the book, they could then send their own stories and things in, which is amazing, because then I remember getting like, just like people wrote stories, short stories, and they drew artwork and comic strips.
Yeah.
And it's just like amazing, because like these are people that, as a writer, it's kind of weird. You don't really imagine other people reading. Like you do this work in solitary, because it's a solitary kind of profession.
Right.
And then it kind of just goes out into the world. And by the time people are looking at it and reading it, it's like a year, 2 years on from when you were doing it. And you're doing other things. So to kind of be reminded that people actually read it and like it is amazing.
Right.
And aside from Empire State, I do get a kind of, not steady stream, but a kind of occasional drip of fan art and things, which is cool. And it's really cool with things like Dishonored, because people were kind of combining stuff from the books with stuff from the games, because obviously the games have got a huge huge following, like a very dedicated following. And it was really amazing to see that people actually could take the stuff from the books and like merge it with the universe. Like the books, they're all part of the series, but to actually kind of do the fan art and stories and things, it's amazing. It's great. It's like I have no problem with fan fiction, fan creations. It's a real joy, actually.
Yeah. I was also going to ask you, because we were talking about this before we got started, but you also worked on a comic series also for Dark Circle Comics. How is that different from the other things that you've done too, writing for a comic?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm a huge comic fan, and you probably can't see behind me. No, you can't.
There's been a lot of discussion of what's behind you, actually.
Really?
People are very impressed by your Lego collection.
Oh, it's funny. You know what? I have no room for any more. We just moved house recently, and I managed to squeeze it all back into my office. But like, I'm out of room, which is sad because Lego keeps sending me emails, like the new collector's edition. Like the Y-wing is the latest one. There's like a snow speeder. I have no room.
But I believe it's the Lego Death Star as well as a Sandcrawler. Both have been points of jealousy.
Oh right, yeah. My favorite is actually Slave One.
Oh right, yeah.
Nice.
It's cool because it's massive. It's like, yeah. And I have the Super Star Destroyer, which is like 2 meters long. But comic books, yeah, I'm a huge fan of comics, like completely. So like writing comics is something that I want to do, and I'm trying to keep doing that. So doing The Shield was great because I love Archie comics, as you probably might have guessed. But Archie comics have this huge super, originally called Red Circle and Dark Circle. The Mighty Crusaders, which is funny because it's been going, like, there's Marvel and there's DC and there's Archie. They're the 3 golden age superhero comic book companies,
right?
Which people kind of don't really realize. So The Shield was amazing because they asked me and Chuck Wendig, who has written some Star Wars books, amongst other things. But yeah, we've been friends for a long time, and we kind of were asked to pitch a new version of The Shield. So The Shield is like a kind of, they hate me saying this, but it's like the Captain America kind of analog. In fact, he predates Captain America, which they also hate me saying. It's been a while ago. It's funny because, Captain America, he's got a shield, right, which is circular. His original shield in the 40s was shield shaped,
right?
And which is the same as the Shield's shield. And Archie sued Marvel and got them to change the shield of Captain America into a circle.
Oh, wow.
I did not know that. That's fascinating.
This is like 1942 or something.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like all the...
Because Captain America copied the shield. Anyway, I get in trouble if I say that. But so we did The Shield, which was, they asked us to reboot the character, which has been, this is a Golden Age character that's existed in various forms. There's like 2 or 3 different versions. And they're like, let's take this iconic flag-wearing hero and turn the male character into a female character. And kind of update it for a new audience, which is great, which is like exactly the kind of thing that Chuck wanted to do with it.
Right.
And we kind of turned it on its head because this is the latest version of the Shield, and like she's number 4 out of. But we kind of wrote the story in that, which actually she's always been the Shield. She is the original Shield, going back to the American Revolution.
Oh wow.
And in fact, that's the other ones that were the kind of secondary things, which is great because I not only love comic books, but I'm a massive kind of comic history fanatic. So to kind of go back and not change comics history, but kind of adjust it in kind of cool, geeky ways that mean nothing. Like they mean nothing to people who read it and enjoy it. But if you know what's going on, you can kind of get all the kind of little tweaks.
Right.
And it was really cool because obviously that was my first, actually my second comic that I wrote. The first one was like a little small press kind of thing. But this was the first proper comic.
Right.
And then obviously that's very different to writing prose, like totally. But then being a comic fan, and I kind of had studied the form for so long, it felt very natural.
Right.
And I think Chuck and I both enjoyed it quite a lot because it's a very different thing. You know, you write a 22-page issue of a comic, kind of ends on a cliffhanger, and you know you can write a single issue in a week, or get a draft done in a week, and that kind of you get this much quicker satisfaction as a writer, you know, from developing a story and from being able to get it down so quickly, which is cool. And then then you see the artwork, which is nothing like you imagine it's going to be, because even though in the kind of comic script, you're helping the artist by describing, obviously, because people probably know, but like, you know, a comic script looks a bit like a screenplay,
right?
And that you're writing out the panel and describing what's in panels and the action kind of thing. But the approach that I think we took was, you know what, we are writers and we can write the story, but artists know what they're doing.
Right.
And they have a completely different set of skills and storytelling ability to us.
Right.
So the script was basically, we wrote everything out, but it's like, if you have a better idea, or if there's another way to do it, or you want to put something in, you go for it because you know how to tell the story.
Right.
You know, because a comic is this truly collaborative process between the writer and the artist.
Right.
You know, and one cannot exist without the other. Which again is kind of this different thing, because writing prose is, you know, solitary, as I said, usually. You know, and working with Chuck is always fun. It's funny because like we're completely different kind of writers. You know, his books and my books are totally different, and our approaches to things are different. So when it came to writing the story writing the issues of the Shield, that was perfect because like what each of us could do was not what the other person could do. So you have like two sets of ideas kind of coming to create something new. And that was like really kind of interesting and exciting. And I think if our style and voices had been closer together, it wouldn't have worked quite as well.
Yeah.
Because like he'd come up with stuff I'd never think of. And then I'd change it because I had this other idea. And he was like, he was the same. It's like I never would have done that. So yes, that was fun. That was 4 issues, and I think the character still exists because they then did the Mighty Crusaders, which is a team book. There's like 4 or 5 or 6 different kind of superheroes. But yeah, I mean, I love comics. I love Archie comics, Archie superheroes. So that was cool. I'm pleased to have done that.
Really quick, we have one question there in our chat that wants to know more about your Star Wars collection, and if you have any action figures in addition to your Legos.
He specifically says vintage. Boss Bounty's a guy asking. He runs a Star Wars collection channel, so he's very interested in all things collectible.
You know, I don't have any vintage stuff anymore. I'm one of these sad stories of someone who grew up in the 80s loving Star Wars and watching them on VHS every week. Like my dad used to, on his way home from work on a Friday night, used to bring home The Empire Strikes Back because there was a local video rental store down the street.
Right.
And we used to go together and like try and pick, and I always used to pick Empire Strikes Back. so we just stopped going, and he'd just stop on the way home from work. Every Friday, Empire Strikes Back.
That's awesome.
So I had a huge collection of figures because also I was very lucky in that my dad traveled to Asia and Japan and China quite a lot for business, and he brought back action figures and toys, kind of duty free. And I had not quite everything, but almost everything. and now I have nothing.
Oh.
Because this is what happens. You go off it and you toys, and you kind of sell them at garage sales and give them away, and then later on you're like, why did I do that? So I content myself with Lego, Star Wars Lego. There's a few other things. I'm trying to see behind me. I can't. There's like some San Diego Comic-Con figures.
Nice.
Yeah, because I've got that kind of collector mentality.
Right.
Restricted now by space, which is probably quite a good thing. Like it'll be out of control. Yeah. Seriously.
My collection obsession for the last year have been Funko Pop figures. And,
oh man!
And my wife is always reminding me of space limitations when I buy more of them.
I have to restrict myself to those because the problem with those are very tempting. Because they're like small.
Yeah.
And you think, oh yeah, this is really cool, and there's all these Star Wars ones, and there's all these other stuff. So yeah, I have a desk toy one actually, which I'm not allowed to show you because it'll reveal something.
That's no fair. Kevin did that to us too.
Really?
Yeah, he's like, I'm writing a thing I can't tell you about. Thanks, Kevin.
You have to end on a cliffhanger. This is writing.
Well, one thing we want to do, since you are our first live interview like this, we came up with an idea for something we could do with all of our guests. We have a list of really quick questions here that we want to rattle through really quickly and get your answers to these.
Sure.
So, who is your favorite Star Wars character?
Yeah, you say quick questions.
Never ask a Star Wars fan what their favorite character is, because you'll get like a 2-day long answer.
There you
go. I have to say, I've got two answers. Mm-hmm. My first answer is Forlom.
Okay, solid.
Because again, this goes back to Empire Strikes Back and my session with the bounty hunter scene, and the fact that the toys of Forlom and Zuckuss, the names were swapped.
That's right. They were. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's now it's kind of like a Star Wars joke because there's like short stories and things where the two of them are kind of they're confused. Yeah.
Right.
But probably Sabine Wren from Star Wars Rebels. My favorite character.
Oh man.
She's just amazing.
Yeah, we were both.
I really want those replica helmets that you can get.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Of Sabine, like they're like $500 or something.
I have two friends from the Star Wars Twitter sphere that are both working on cosplay helmets. It's been cool watching them.
Oh, cool.
Construct that, yeah.
Those Mandalorian ones, they look difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Crap.
So that was my short answer. Sorry.
There you go. But we got a lot of Bosk fans in the house, so I think they would argue with you about Forlom. But
that whole scene though with Bosk and everything.
Yeah. Next, what's the most recent book that you read?
I just finished a book.
That's how it always happens.
Yep.
It's funny because I've gone through one of those phases where like I read a book and I get halfway.
Oh yeah.
Right.
It was probably Last Shot.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
Last Shot.
Yep.
That was a good one.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah,
Daniel Jose Older is amazing.
Yeah, we both like that book a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The droid Gotra.
Yeah, I swore by the droid Gotra earlier today. Very mad at someone.
Yeah.
And everything about the crazy scientist in that book. I wanted like a whole book about the crazy like Powan guy.
Yeah.
If you weren't an author, what would you want to do instead?
I don't know. It's kind of difficult.
Yeah.
When I was difficult questions. The simplest question. Like when I was growing up, I wanted to be a chef for some reason.
Oh wow!
And I don't know why, because I really hate cooking. I love it. Like I love
That's
eating.
gotta be like the quote of the past 5 StreamCasts or 25 StreamCasts. I wanted to be a chef, but I hated cooking.
So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I used to be in a band back in, which is
that's cool.
Story. We got to number 2 in the indie top 10 in 2003. Problem is, you can't make money doing that. Like you can't make money being a writer. So yeah, here I am.
Well, since you mentioned music, this is another hard one. What would be your go-to karaoke song?
Hungry Like the Wolf by Duran Duran.
Ooh, very good.
If that's the title, is it the title? Yeah. Definitely.
If you were to retire to a Star Wars planet, what planet would you choose to live on?
You can blame me for this question.
You know, I'd retire. It's not a planet; it's a moon. But I'd retire to because it's like forests and peaceful, and the kind of Ewoks are busy being murder cannibal bears.
Unrelated to your Yub Nub tweet earlier.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. It's like you'd have to make friends with the Ewoks.
Oh yeah.
Like very carefully, otherwise they'll eat you.
Right.
Yeah, they'll murder you in your sleep. And other than that, like it's usually peaceful and nice, foresty, and like mists and ferns. You know, there's no Death Star anymore, so that'd be nice.
There you
go. Let's see. I've lost my list of questions here. What's your favorite snack food? Just bouncing around here.
Cheese.
Cheese is solid.
Fair enough.
We're fancy European cheese.
Not available to us less fancy Americans. But
well,
we have Velveeta and Cheese Whiz here. It's very fancy.
Yeah, that's a different kind of thing, I think. Yeah.
What is your favorite word?
That's easy. Magenta.
That's a good word.
That is a good word.
You'll find magenta in everything I've written, I think.
That's really?
Cool.
I think.
Now I'm going to flip through.
That's a funny streak.
I'm going to have to look for magenta now. But we do want to thank you for being on here today. Before we wrap things up, do you want to plug what you have coming up? I know you said you had a book coming out in a couple of weeks, and
yeah,
I know you just tweeted about a revamped website too.
Yes, finally. Oh my god. The idea being that I don't have to touch it. Like if I have a new book out, I can just like put that on and then that's it, because I don't blog or anything.
Yeah.
It's just kind of minimal effort on my part. But the third Dishonored book is out this September 25th. It's called The Veiled Terror, and it takes place after the third game, which is Death of the Outsider. And the main character is Billy Lurk, who is the main character in Death of the Outsider. So it kind of directly continues the story of the game. Which is September 25th, I think. And then I've got some stuff out next year. Working on some other stuff, you know. Because I'm sort of snowed under with work. I'm not really doing many events, but I will be at the San Diego Comic next year, which is only like 10 months away. Yeah. So you know,
start planning now.
I'm sure people are going to remember that.
I feel like Comic-Con is always right around the corner.
It is, yeah. And then there's the panic of hotels and the panic of registration and the whole crazy nonsense of it, which is great because I love it. I haven't been for a couple of years either, so I'm looking forward to that.
And you were actually pretty active on Twitter too.
Oh yeah, so Twitter Ghostfire, which is 100% Star Wars canon. It's true, it is.
Where Pablo has stopped, you have picked up the reins.
Yeah. But yeah, so Twitter is really where you can find me, or Instagram or anything. So I have too many distractions already. So yeah.
But we do thank you for coming and joining us on the StreamCast today. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. You guys did, before this thing started, you guys did Star Wars way back whenever it was, and thank you so much. And it's a real honor and pleasure to talk to you both finally. And I'm so glad that we could make this work.
Yeah, us too. And if you guys are interested in seeing the interview we did with him about From a Certain Point of View, seeing his website, finding his Twitter, it should all be in the description. So you guys can all find that easily enough. And I'd like to thank our chat. We had a great chat here. A lot of really cool people.
Oh yeah, actually, thanks for that, because I've been down as we've been going. So thank you for the comments. If you have any more questions, if people have questions, they can just find me, and I'm happy to answer as needed.
That's what I've been doing lately, is just tweeting at you incessantly about your books.
It's been quite a shocker as we've done this site and talked to people to learn that authors are like real people.
It's amazing, right? Yeah.
Right? I get excited when people like their things. It's been fascinating. But yeah, thank you again, everyone. It was great talking with Adam. It was great talking with all of you. We are gonna try to keep Monday as a regular. Not sure on the time, but hopefully we'll see you next week about a topic we will pick out soon. And you can always tweet us with suggestions or leave a comment after the fact if you have a stream suggestion. But thank you to everyone, and we will see you all again soon.
Bye.
Bye.